righty. Hello. Welcome everyone who is tuning in. Welcome to the folks, whether it be the morning or the afternoon. I'm Sarah Munjak. I'm the Director of Marketing and Partnerships for Consciously Unbiased, which is an organization whose mission is to create more inclusive workplaces. So today we're joining you to talk to 4 women authors about their powerful and motivating books, as well as how and why women can use their voice for change. We're going to go a couple different places with that. So I'm really excited for this conversation. We really have an amazing group here. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And the way I'd love to kick us off here is to have each of you go around and introduce yourselves. So when you do that, could you start off with saying your name, the name of your book, and you can share a tidbit about why writing the book was or is important to you. So, let's go ahead and kick it off. Let's see. Jessica, would you like to start us off?
I would love to. Hi, my name is Jessica Doyle Meckes, and my book, which comes out on the 15th of this month, is called I'm Speaking. Thank you. I'm Speaking, Every Woman's Guide to Finding Your Voice and Using It Fearlessly. And writing this book was super important for me because that is what I do. I'm a vocal coach and a professor and researcher of voice, and have been a voice nerd for the last at least 15 years, working with actors, singers, public speakers. And I am so proud and excited to bring my work to the book and to all of you.
Yay! Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's see, Whitney or Dr. Whitney, however you'd like to be preferred to be addressed.
Yeah, you can call me Dr. Whitney or Whitney, either way. I'm very casual. So I am Dr. Whitney Caceres, and my book is called Doing It All, Stop Overfunctioning and Become the Mom and Person You Are Meant to Be. I am a pediatrician. I'm here in my office, as you all can probably tell. And this book was important to me because day after day, week after week, year after year, I see moms that come into my practice that just are stretched so thin, that are doing it all, that basically are defined by their to-do list. And unfortunately, it makes it so that we're missing the mark as parents, as moms, when we do that. And I know this to be true for myself as well. I am a recovering do-it-aller. When my first daughter was born, she had autism, was diagnosed with autism. Motherhood hit me in a way that I did not expect. And I was forced to really reckon with the way that I planned to approach being a modern woman and a modern mom, with what was actually realistic for me and what would make it so that I actually had a life that had purpose and alignment. So now I'm really focused on doing the same for other moms around
me. Thank you. That's a beautiful message. Thank you for joining us as well. Let's see, Ruby, would you like to introduce yourself?
I am Ruby Sunshine Taylor, and I am on a cruise ship, and I'm hoping that the Wi-Fi holds on just for 60 minutes, please. I am a social worker turned financial equalizer. I am a stutterer. So if you hear the word that I am trying to say, authors, please help me say it so that we can move on, because I get stuck. All right. It could be a little game of charades. Let's see. I am the author of The Unconventional CEO, How to Build Wealth and Joy in the Face of Adversity. I'm so excited about this book because I share my story of being a traumatic brain injury survivor, which took me out of working as a school social worker and put me in a bad health, financial, spiritual, emotional space, and how I grew through it. And started a whole company company called Financial Joy School. We have been in Forbes, Inc., Mashable, partnered with Wells Fargo, the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, and a whole lot of other amazing companies such as Trust and Will. And so I take my story and basically share and give like tips and strategies on how I have made it over and how I am making it over, because it is a continuous process. It's not just a one stop.
Yes.
And so my book will come out December 12th, but you can pre-order it next week. And check us out at theunconventionalceo.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruby, so much for sharing that. It's a really powerful message, and I'm sure lots of folks really need to hear it. So thank you so much for joining us today as well. And last but certainly not least, Suzanne.
I realized I have a prop. My name is Dr. Suzanne Wirth. I'm a different kind of doctor than Whitney. And I'm a former professor of linguistic anthropology. And in 2011, I left UCLA to start my own company called Worthwhile Research and Consulting. I focus on anti-bias in the workplace. So it's sometimes called DEI, sometimes called other things. My book, here's the prop, is called The Inclusive Language Field Guide. It's got a long subtitle that I don't feel the need to say. That's mostly for SEO, so people can find it. But basically, avoid painful mistakes and communicate respectfully. I wrote the book in part because people asked me to. So I would have heads of HR, heads of recruiting, heads of DEI, people who were helping out with executive teams. They're like, our people are making mistakes. They are very nervous when they speak. They don't know what to do. And also a lot of people, I could feel a general nervousness around the new etiquette. People can feel that there are new ways to be speaking, and they're afraid of getting canceled, or they're afraid of just not being as welcoming as they want to be. So the book came out last week on October 3rd. Wow. And it's been doing well. Last couple of days, it's been Amazon #1 new release in communication reference. It gets very niche, but it's been an Amazon bestseller in 2 out of my 3 categories since it came out, which is cool.
That's amazing.
And I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from people. It's interesting. I was just at a women's networking event for financial advisors, mostly the other day. And some of them work on inclusivity, or they've got a range of diverse clients. And I was explaining my book to them. And you could see them melting with relief. You know, that thing that people do. And they were like, oh, I don't have to memorize really long lists of words. And then they change all the time. And I can't figure out how one group relates to another. I'm like, I got you. Read the book, do my exercises. So it's been nice to see in real time how the book is really a relief to people. My acquisitions editor called it a painkiller and not a vitamin. And now that I'm seeing the uptick, people are like, oh my God, I've been feeling so bad, and your book can genuinely help me. And I'm like, just a few hours, you could do it. So.
That's great. Thank you. It seems like you're giving folks a real tool set so that they can walk away feeling like they're equipped to move forward without it feeling like I can't do this or I can do that. And it's more so, it sounds like to me, a mindset shift for moving forward. Would you say that's correct?
It's not just a mindset shift. It's a paradigm shift in ways of thinking about inclusive language. I'm sure we'll hit it later. Yes. But most inclusive language discussions and resources are identity-based. Here's a group. Here's their history. Here are the ways they've been treated badly. Here's some words to not use. Use these words instead. Here's another group. Well, that didn't work for my clients who are global, because stuff that works in the US is not necessarily applicable in other places, although women are always not the dominant group. So that is one fun universal, is gender bias. But I shift it to behaviors, inclusive behaviors, and a set of principles to follow. And those principles are based on cross-linguistic and cross-cultural data. So they're designed to be universal. So even if you grew up somewhere else, or there's a range of communication cultures in the US, you can still apply these principles to your own life and then just populate them differently. So it's really a paradigm shift. I'm defining inclusive language as behavior and not a list
Right.
of words.
Well,
So-
I'm really excited to dig into it further because actually, here at Consciously Unbiased, we do DEI training or whatever you'd like to call it. Some folks DEI training, workforce training, but we do inclusive language training, and we usually pair it with psychological safety. And so I'm really excited to talk about that later on. But for now, I'd love to ask Jessica a question here. So your book directly speaks to how women can find their voice. Can you speak to a little bit why that's important or what exactly that means? And also, in addition to that, how has your work as a vocal coach influenced the book? It's kind of two-parter there.
Absolutely. So I think the question of how do we find our voice, or what does it mean to find your voice? I know for me, that's one I get asked a lot because it's sort of a hot phrase that's thrown around. It's also part of the title of my book. So it's a very popular phrase. For me, finding your voice is two things. One, it's getting to know your voice physically. So our voices are something that are always with us, right? Whether it's the voice in our head or the voice coming out of our mouth, she's always there, right? Mine's usually very mouthy. And I think it's something that we often don't consider until we need it and it's not there, right? And research shows that our ears are actually better at picking up human emotion, at picking up nuanced emotion vocally than our eyes are at picking up body language or facial expressions. So whatever you're feeling, whatever you're bringing into that conversation or that presentation is going to show up on your voice. And I think something to note is that the voice is largely made of skeletal muscle, which is the same kind of muscle you work in the gym. And even though these muscles are really small, and you're talking about the whole larynx, the whole voice box being about the size of your thumb, they can be trained and they adhere to the same exercise principles as the rest of your body. And because of that, we have a lot of control. And once you have that knowledge, you have a lot of control. In fact, I have a chapter in my book. I think it's chapter 4. It's called The Nitty Gritty. And basically, the reader goes through and records themselves speaking, which I know nobody wants to do because everyone hates hearing, right, the sound of their voice. I joke that my mother-in-law says she sounds like Mickey Mouse on helium. Sometimes she does. No, I'm just kidding. But when we can get over that and we can listen to our authentic sound, then we can do something about it. Right. And so the rest of the chapter goes through and it says, okay, what do you hear in terms of pitch, in terms of pace, in terms of tone, in terms of clarity and energy? Are you sounding the way that you want to? Right. Do you sound like yourself? And then it gives exercises of how to effectively and efficiently make those changes if and when you decide that that's something that you want to do. So I know that stereotypes exist in terms of what power and authority sound like. And those stereotypes are often very white, they're very male, and women are often coached to sound in a way that is not authentic to ourselves, right? And so I firmly believe that you can sound authentic to who you are and also command a room. Right. And I think the first step with that is the knowledge about your voice and then knowing, how do I sound? Right. So that's sort of the first half of finding your voice. For me, the second half of it is the voice in your head. And the term imposter syndrome is all over for women in the media right now. I call it imposter syndrome. And it's dealing with that, with the way that you speak to yourself and doing the work internally as well, because the way that we speak to ourselves and the way that we speak to others really has the power to change our entire lives. And brain science research over the past decade has really revealed a lot of tools of how to be more effective and more efficient in terms of learning new things, in terms of communication, in terms of taking care of your body, your brain, your voice. And so when we can put those steps into practice, then for me, that's finding your voice. It's the knowledge about how it works. It's how to make the changes positively that you want to make so that you can deliver. And then it's the fear, it's the performance anxiety. I am an actor, I work with actors, and it's dealing with that performance anxiety and being able to put the steps in place so that regardless of situation, you feel confident in what it is that you're saying. So that's sort of the first answer, Sarah, into finding your voice. The second question of how does me as a vocal coach play into this?
Yeah.
So I spent the first, and still do, I'm the head of a musical theater program. So I work predominantly with singers. And what I noticed is that the work that I do in terms of voice science and voice research is very applicable to speaking, to public speaking, in terms of things like volume and resonance and clarity and all of those tools. The other side of that is, as I mentioned before, the performance anxiety side of it. And that a lot of what we do as human beings is very performative, right? We want to feel confident, be it if we're pitching a business, if we're having a client meeting, if we're having an important conversation. We don't want to let those nerves get in the way of our message, right? And we want to sound a way that leaves people engaged and listening to what we're saying and not wondering if what we have is contagious and if they're going to catch it, right? So that's really where it came together for me. As I saw there was a lot of literature on female empowerment and, you know, being your best self and all of those things. There's a lot of literature on public speaking, but there wasn't a lot of crossover in terms of how to take your voice and use it to make the changes that you want to make. And that is why I wrote the book.
Wow. There is so much there. And as you were speaking about it, it was really dovetailing in my mind with what Suzanne was saying as well with English language. And I think your book really does an excellent job of braiding together neuroscience, physiology, I'm hearing. I mean, you really started off talking about the larynx, the vocal cords, right? So we're talking about the body, talking about sociology, and how we're interpreting what we're saying to ourselves externally and internally. There's so much there. And I love that it's bringing all of that together to have that same conversation. So that's really, really interesting.
Thank you. I'll add too that it's also funny. That was really important to me, is that it is brain science based, it's voice science based. It's also, I feel, and the feedback that I've gotten from my early readers, it's a really enjoyable read. So I like to say I have, from some of my relationships and stories in my past, it's my little Taylor Swift moment also on some of those things.
I love that. Okay, excellent. All right. So Ruby, I'd love to turn to you and ask you, so you use the word unconventional, the unconventional CEO. Can you share how exactly your book might speak to an unconventional audience, or alternatively, who could best benefit from the book?
Okay, so I am so unconventional. Number one, I started out as a school social worker, right? Usually we do not start businesses, right? The next thing, I am disabled, right? I am a lesbian, I am a woman. Every minority, I just check that box, right? And usually people who are women, who are disabled, who like come from the social sciences, do not start businesses, right? And so I did not allow titles to basically tell me who I am. So the unconventional CEO is for women, men, disabled people who want to lead but feel like the world tells them you cannot. I am here to really shout loudly that not only can you lead, you can lead with joy. Not only can you lead with joy, you can also build generational wealth, right? We can do it all. So that's what makes me so unconventional, because I don't care what anybody says, you are a CEO, not by your title, but by your purpose. And so my book talks about, number one, being authentically you, right? We don't need no copy cats, right? We need everybody to show up as their best selves, right? The next thing, right? You have to be resilient. Life will knock you down several times. We have the power to basically get back up, and guess what? Throw those lemons back. Stop making lemonade from something you did not want. Throw that sucker back, right? So basically, you have to have joy. You have to be resilient. You have to have optimism eternally, right? Eternal optimism is what I preach. And then the next thing, you have to be financially free, right? Whatever that means to you. For some, that could mean paying my bills on time. Somebody else, that could mean $10 million in the bank, right? And so the book basically is a book about leadership and financial freedom. And so I'm so excited about that, because my mission for my company, Financial Joy School, is to close the racial wealth gap. And so like this book helps it in so many different ways. And what else is really dope about the book, besides my mom saying that it is dope,
I love that.
right, is that we have 4 amazing women giving their leadership story in the book, which I call the intermission section. We have the amazing Chantel Roche. She is the diversity director for Staples. We have Jenny, the amazing Jenny Flores. She is a executive over at Wells Fargo. Then we have Tamika Brown. She is the training manager for the Navy Federal Credit Union. And then last but certainly never ever least, we have my amazing 85-year-old mother sharing her own story. And so the book is simply amazing. And if you ever doubted your leadership skills, this book. If you are trying to figure out financial freedom for yourself and your loved ones, get the book, because you will learn that and oh, so much more. And the Wi-Fi stayed on. Yes. Okay. So and I get excited about the little stuff. So that's it from me.
Thank you so much. Okay, Ruby, first of all, I'm going to need you to make a recording so I can set it as my alarm so that it's the first thing I hear every morning when I wake up. Like, please.
We can make that happen.
That was so powerful and so beautiful. And the message that you're doing so much here to uplift your mom and everyone around you. And then your message feels like a message that really needs to be heard. And there's so many folks who can benefit from that. So thank you so much. That is really, there's so much richness to that. And thank you so much. So, looks like maybe some Wi-Fi issues. So I'll keep going here. All right, Dr. Whitney, when I started reading about your book, I came across the interesting study that was done by Ohio State University, which found that 66% of working parents, 66% of working parents feel like they have nothing left to give because they face burnout. So this is really an issue that affects the home and our health, but it also affects the workplace. So without giving way too much of your book away, is there maybe one main first step that moms specifically can take to address this?
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting, as Jessica was talking and as Ruby was talking, is that both women really focused on this idea of knowing yourself, having self-awareness, like that authentic self. And I firmly believe that while it's important that we build strategies, that we build policies to support women in the workplace and at home, that we're building more equity, that we are missing a first step that is critical for women to actually succeed. And that is showing women how to know themselves again. You know, when we talk about boundaries in the world, body boundaries, time boundaries, money boundaries, there's a boundary that's about self. And many women are guilty of not being very great on this boundary. So the boundary about self is always taking the temperature of other people, always asking, what does somebody else need? Always making sure that you are meeting other people's expectations at the detriment to yourself. So abandoning yourself and your own needs and who you are. When I meet with women online on my platform, Modern Mommy Doc, when I interview people for my podcast, the Modern Mommy Doc podcast, and when I see people in my clinic, that is a common theme. When I say, hey, what if you spent some time really doing something you would love to do? They go, I don't even know what I love to do anymore. I don't even know who I am anymore. When they have a free hour, they spend it doing chores because they have no sense of self. That self boundary has really just been dissipated. Mm-hmm. So I actually start the book, Start Doing It All, not from a place of strategy, but from a place of self-awareness and of helping women to build their priorities again and to figure out what really matters most to them. And like Ruby was saying about financial freedom, this is very individualized for each and every person because we're all individual humans. So for me, one of my 5 big categories that I want to focus as much time and energy and emotion on, it's going to be my kids. I want to make sure I have a great relationship with them. Equally important in my little centered circle, I call it, is the work that I do. But it's not the patient charts that I finish. It's the actual passionate work of connecting with people, of contributing to people, of really making sure that I'm uplifting people. So when I coach women, and in the book, I talk a ton about creating that centered circle, 5 things that bring you joy, that bring you purpose, that when you are 80 years old or 85 years old, like Ruby's mom, and you're looking back on your life, that you can say, I feel so proud of who I am and of what I did and of what I accomplished in my life. And that could be relational, it could be job related, it could be places you've gone in the world, whatever that is for you. So we have to find that self-awareness first. The second thing that I coach moms on and people in general on is this idea of self-acceptance and radical acceptance. I live in a household with a daughter who is a well of need. It never runs dry. Autistic kids, they're hardwired to be rigid, to have certain needs that just don't go away. And so even though I would love to manifest me having this amazing time as a mom, I have a very rocky time as a mom in my house with my kid, with my second kid, who sometimes feels like she's left in the dust, with my husband, who feels like, why isn't this the family that I signed up for? It's completely different. And so I have had to learn in my own personal experience that it's actually not about creating a perfect life for myself. It's about existing in the life that I have here in the real world. And I think that moms need more of that. They need less manifesting, less like affirmations of this perfect life and this perfect vision. That sets them up for even more disappointment and for expectations they cannot reach, especially when it comes to building equity in the house. In my house, hey, I do not have a misogynistic husband or someone who's a chauvinist, but he is not taking on 50% of the mental load. I still am the she-fault parent in my house. And so while I continue to work on that with my partner in very real ways and fight for that and show him all the lists and try to divide and conquer, I also have to find within myself that value of I am worthy of just enough time, just as much time, just as much energy, just as much joy as everyone else that exists in my life. And if my partner or my kids or society can't see that, that's still okay. I'm still going to be okay as I do the hard work to make that happen eventually for my kids, for their kids, for their kids, because we know it's taken since the beginning of time for us to get to this point where we're finally talking about equity for moms and for equity for caregivers. And it's going to take a while for it to come to fruition for all of us. So after I figure out for moms, okay, what are the things you want to say yes to? What matters to you? Who are you? Then it's time within the framework that I have called the Centered Life Blueprint to figure out strategies for all the other things in our life that have to get done, but that shouldn't define us. And I break those up into 4 categories. There's the non-negotiables, the things only you can do and you have to do. So you have to apply some efficiency and productivity tasks and tips to that. But that's not where it ends. Then there's the swappables, all those things I want to give away to somebody else, but I have to have the internal fortitude and foundation of self-worth to be able to do that. There's the contaminators, all of the things that people throw at me and say I should do, like PTA meetings that I do not want to do, but I do because people tell me that's what it means to be a good mom. And then there's the boundaries. So the heartstrings, the things that tug on me, my dad who has Parkinson's, who I want to spend a lot of time with, but it hurts, it leaves me drained. And so I have to figure out ways to really honor him and our relationship in ways that don't take away from my core center that matters to me and makes me who I am. So really, I think it's about not starting from the outside in, but rather from the inside out for moms to help with this burnout problem and this burnout problem for all caregivers.
Wow. I needed that. There's so much there. My brain is really stuck, and not stuck in a positive or negative way, but just stuck in a way on the term of radical acceptance. Because anytime we see that word radical, it kind of signals to the brain, hey, pay attention to this, right? And I think that radical acceptance is so important because it seems like we need to be able to do that for ourselves before we can also begin to radically accept others, right? And I think that goes in line with what we're all talking about here, which is bringing about equity, whether it be in your social circles or in the workplace. And we're not going to be able to get into that point and bring each other up around us without first being able to do that internally for ourselves. So it seems like everyone needs to read this book, really, in order to bring us towards a place of change and progress here. So
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, radical acceptance really is just about, there's so much science behind this, cognitive behavioral theory science, around the more that you push something away or say, this doesn't exist, it's not true for me, no, I'm not going to accept it, the harder it is to actually work on it. So the faster that you're able to say, okay, this is the situation I'm in, this is how it is. then the sooner you're able to say, okay, then now what are the next steps to be able to change it? Now what are the next steps to be able to make progress within the situation that I live and that I can't change?
Mm, I love that. And I like that there are steps. I like that there are numbers personally because it makes it feel attainable. It gives people a starting place and a checkpoint. And I think that that's really helpful. So thank you. All right. So I want to circle back to Suzanne here. We talked about inclusive language, but I want to level set and I want to actually back up a little bit because some folks who might be joining us today might not be super familiar with that term. So first, could you just define inclusive language, what it really is, and beyond that, what are some of the reasons? What's the why? Why should we all be striving to be more inclusive? And beyond that, what are some high impact ways for us to start? Let's say we get on board. How can we start? How can you help us be better?
Sure. And even before that, to level set, just yesterday I was talking with people about how my book is in some ways also a health and wellness book because so many people have this sort of low level underlying anxiety, like the monster under the bed, or, it's like that thing that you're like,
Yes.
oh no, like, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to hurt? Am I going to get called out? Am I going to get canceled? This low level, but everything seems so intimidating or weird or far from their experience. And so I've been realizing that my book, again, as I'm talking to people like small business owners who are women and people whose kids are going to school and coming back with things that they're saying and they can't quite explain why they aren't right to say, that it's a relief to be able to put down the stress because you figured something out, right? So one reason is also health and wellness. Like, how can you take a thing and instead of hiding it and being afraid of it, be like, oh, here's a simple set of steps I can do. Let me do them. So that's my pre-level set. Now the level set is, what is inclusive language? It's not just the way I define it. It's not just a list of words to avoid and words to use, because I've spent more than 2 decades studying how language works in context. What's actually going on contextually? Why is a list of words going to be insufficient? So the way I think about and talk about inclusive language is a set of practices that strengthen and deepen relationships. It's usually word choice, but it's not just word choice. So inclusive language helps build trust. And in particular, it makes people feel seen and heard and valued and like they've been taken into consideration. So this is a female-centered panel, and I'll say that a lot of this is emotional labor work, which for those of us who were assigned female at birth and raised female, we have been trained that that is our responsibility, right? So for a lot of people, so for many people who were assigned female at birth, this feels, even if they're non-binary or transitioned, that training is still there. And so this emotional labor can feel kind of natural. But for a lot of people, this kind of emotional labor isn't something they've had to take into account. And it's a big step. So my contrast to inclusive language is what I call problematic language, which you can throw lots of labels and names at. But people have very strong stress responses to being called racist or homophobic or transphobic, especially if their mistake is inadvertent because the rules have shifted or the language has shifted and they just didn't keep up. So I'm moving aside all these labels and I'm saying, let's just call it problematic language, right? Because it is problematic. So what does problematic language do? The opposite of inclusive language. So it lowers trust. It makes people feel marginalized or forgotten about entirely, right? And it tells people that they don't matter enough to be paid attention to put in effort to make them feel comfortable, to be taken care of, right? And so it drives them away. And this applies to all kinds of relationships. So I have business clients, but the book isn't just for people in business. I originally wrote the book for parents of trans kids, or newly out trans kids, newly out non-binary kids, maybe to hand to their parents or other family members and get up to speed because that's such a sensitive time. And so many of them have suicidal ideations. How can you make it as soft and understanding as possible so these kids, even if you're making mistakes, feel valued and being taken in consideration? Okay, so your next question was, why should we be more inclusive? I mean, you and I work on this professionally, so we know the answer, right?
Yeah.
There's so many reasons. I would say, especially right now, I was on CBS News Bay Area yesterday. I thought I was just going to talk about inclusive language. And they're like, how does inclusive language relate to conflict in the Middle East? I'm like, oh, But I actually had answers, because if you think I didn't spend all weekend thinking about it, it was there. So just common humanity. Problematic language and problematic behaviors are polarizing, and they dehumanize people. Inclusive language is depolarizing and rehumanizes people.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying inclusive language is going to solve issues in the Middle East, but here it can serve as guidelines and guardrails for talking about emotional and difficult things, right?
Mhm.
So also, it's just the new etiquette. There's 21st century etiquette, and it's different from, I'm Gen X. It's different from the etiquette that I was raised with in one major way. Like sometimes I revisit 80s movies and I'm like, ooh,
Yeah.
like, oh, I mean,
Yeah.
let's just say it, like a lot of them are really rapey for
Yep.
one.
Oh yeah.
And then the way that they treat people who aren't white, I'm like, did I watch this and I wasn't made uncomfortable? I mean, like when I was 15 or whatever, but they're kind of shocking. So I think that 80s movies are a great way to demonstrate this shift, which is in 21st century etiquette, it's still about being respectful and polite, but suddenly we're like, oh, should we take these other people into consideration too, right? And not just the people who were considered important enough to be respectful to. Suddenly there are all of these people who've been historically marginalized and not taken into account. And people are like, well, I want to be respectful, but oh my God, I don't know how, right?
Mhm.
And then I will tell you, this is not my strongest motivation, but I talk to budget makers and stakeholders
Yes.
at businesses of all sides, and I will say,
Yes.
you know what's coming.
Yes.
It is good business to be inclusive, and it is good business to do inclusive language. So let me tell you that the businesses that I work with put most of their money into client acquisition, client retention, and talent acquisition.
Yes.
And inclusive language plays a role in all of those.
Yes.
So if you're marketing, do you want to drive people away, or do you want them to feel seen and like that your company cares about them, right?
Oh yeah.
If you have you want recruiters who don't alienate the candidates
Yes.
that people want in there. And like people have brought me in for workshops because they're like, my hiring manager, like this hiring manager drove away this non-binary person for a like senior director role that I really, really wanted.
Yep.
And they kept on misgendering them. And that person withdrew their candidacy. And they're like, if you can't have the common courtesy of gendering me appropriately, how am I going to focus on my work if I'm always being distracted and disrespected? And they remove themselves. So I've come in for like emergency training on how do we respectfully talk to people. You want customer experience staff who make customers feel like they are being taken into consideration. It might even be something as simple as time zones, right? Like we always think it's about gender and race and ethnicity, but there are lots and lots of ways. Sometimes it's parental status. Sometimes it's not
Yes.
scheduling things at a time that's daycare pickup is one of my
Yes.
prime examples, right?
Yes.
Right? Like
Mhm.
so much of that happens. And then I'm collecting stories for the last few weeks because salespeople are resistant to me coming in, but I'm trying to gather incontrovertible proof that I now have maybe 5 stories that account for maybe $15 million of lost revenue that are just a few words. Sweetheart, can you get me some coffee, to the
Yeah.
woman who is the senior VP in the meeting room? Or, hey guys, constantly to a room full of decision makers who are transgender and female, are most of the people in the room, right? I have all of these stories where, and now, you know, who gets ghosted is also sales reps. So they're like, oh, the price wasn't right. But nobody's going to go educate those salespeople. I felt so disrespected. If you feel disrespected, why are you going to waste why is it your mental load? Why is it your job to educate the people in the way that you felt so disrespected that you're breaking the relationship down
Right.
and moving on? So I'm like, well, I'll explain it to you. So it makes very, very good business sense. Again, not my prime motivation, but it makes very good business sense to put the effort into inclusive language. And then your last question was, how can we do better? And so that's the focus of the book. So I have 6 principles of inclusive language. And there's this thing that happens, I think, with academics, depends on what you're doing. I've been studying the complexities of what we call contextualized language use for, again, more than 2 decades. I used to teach entire grad seminars on context, and there was like a trap door. You're like, oh, you think we're done? We're going one level deeper, like down, down, down. But I got so deep that I circled up to very simple principles again. It's so funny. All my years of study and education, I'm like, oh, I can actually boil this down to 6 universal principles. And
Mm.
they're so simple. And so I'll just tell you what they are. Implementing them takes effort, but
Okay.
comprehending them is not that hard. So they are, first of all, reflect reality. Speaking of radical acceptance, reality has been very distorted for us. And sometimes we just have to come to terms with the fact that the way we were raised to see the world and the way the world actually is are not the same thing. And let's snap into reality. So reflect reality, show respect, draw people in, incorporate other perspectives, prevent erasure, and recognize pain points. If you follow all of those principles, and by the way, sometimes sometimes Gen Z comes in super strong. I've talked to a lot of parents of teenagers who are like, it's a zero tolerance household for mistakes that I make. And sometimes they're like, I really don't understand what the problem is. They can't explain it. So it's kind of like, show your work. Like, where in the 6 principles did I go wrong? And sometimes if people can't explain it, it's because it's actually not problematic language. So sometimes people are going a little too far and calling out stuff that actually isn't a problem, or they're gatekeeping and telling people who are members of a group, like people who are disabled report to me and in writing that they're told that their way of self-referring is wrong by people who say, you shouldn't call yourself a disabled person. You're a person with a disability. You shouldn't talk about yourself like that, because there's all this stigma.
Yeah.
So people will call that inclusive language, person with a disability. And I'm like, no, the gatekeeping and the telling somebody who it's their own label and their own lived experience, that's problematic language, right? So it's those 6 principles. And what I've done, oh my God, I lived a block away from the Price is Right for 7 years. So I'm just going to do this. Like a Price is Right model. So in this book, I'm sorry, I can't figure out where I'm with my camera. There we go. So in this book, here we go, this way. In this book, it's about my 6 principles, and each principle gets a full chapter. And when I say I got you for this, at the end of each chapter are 5 quick wins. So I give real world examples so people understand. I start with a real world story. Here's something gone off the rails. Then I give the analysis. It's filled with real world examples that people remember. In a NetGalley review I just read yesterday, someone said she painted examples that I just can't get out of my mind. I'm like, oh, job done. And then at the end, I give you 5 quick wins. Stop doing this, do this instead. And then 3 activities you can practice in the privacy of your own home and get up to speed. So it's secretly a 6-month course. Like, how can you have me there without having me there? I put myself in the book and you can practice. It's got discussion questions. It's designed for business teams to do. Your book club can do it. It's got all the things that you can do with a practice buddy. Like for exercise, it's the same thing, have an accountability partner for inclusive language. So if you do 1 principle a month, you should go, when you go on autopilot by the end of the 6 months, you have acquired a base level of inclusive language skills and you know how to fine tune them. It's like you wouldn't read a book about French grammar if you don't speak French. You wouldn't read a book about French for 4 hours, maybe 3 hours. I don't know how long my book is. You're not going to read a book about French, put it down and be like, well, I speak French now. Right. Well, inclusive language skills are language skills. You have to practice them a little bit each day in order for your brain to acquire them and move forward, because the biggest problems are when we're on autopilot, and sometimes our highest stake times, we're so busy thinking about what we're going to say that it comes out not the right way. And then you got to backpedal. So what if you had practiced in secret for 6 months and then it comes out right the first time? So that's what I've lost it. But anyway, that's what the previously visible book is for.
Yeah, and there's so much there. It seems like your book is just an amazing tool set, an amazing resource. And I wanted to just speak very briefly to the part about, because a lot of the folks who do tune into this, we have a very wide audience here. So a lot of these folks who might be here might just get it. Yes, this is why I have to do it, because I feel like I have to do it. But then for folks who are more resistant, which is okay, who want to understand the numbers aspect of it or the business decision behind it, a lot of people who do tune into this are in HR or in DEI roles.
Right.
And there's an amazing stat, like in terms of talent acquisition, we do a diverse hiring certification course at Consciously Unbiased. And one of the things that's always so shocking when we're talking to these folks is you see 32% more job application response when your job descriptions are using inclusive language and also more specifically gender neutral wording, even just in terms of gender, 32% more responses. So that's huge. Like the numbers here, the data really is tremendous for the why here. So that I think is always important to say for folks who might feel a little bit more resistant, which is natural. So yeah.
And let me just tag on that super briefly and say that the cost of losing people. So I get brought in to find out why companies are losing people, and I interview them after they quit. And the stuff they're not telling HR in an exit interview, they're telling me, because it's very therapeutic. And then I write up a thing for executives and say, here are the top 10 reasons why you're losing people. And a lot of it is because of problematic language at work or problematic practices where people are being marginalized, right?
Right.
And not being professionally developed. And you know what? It costs 150% of somebody's salary
Oof.
in the year to replace them. So you've got a 200K engineer who's non-binary who left because of the crap that they're taking at work. Well, guess what? It costs $300,000 that year to replace them. And that adds up real fast. So it's not just the recruiting people who you're losing, but you're losing your talent and you don't even know why, because they're not telling you, but they're telling me. And I'm here to circle around and say, you're hemorrhaging money. These companies are hemorrhaging money that they don't even know they're hemorrhaging. And it's not that hard. It takes some effort, but it's not that hard to fix it and plug those leaks.
Absolutely. So important. So important. Thank you. I'm glad you tapped in there. So we have less than 10 minutes together. So I want to make sure that we get to this next question. Might not get to everything here, but the next question I wanted to ask that I've been thinking about before we entered this conversation is the topic of allyship. So whether you feel like you're conventional or unconventional, or whether you feel like you're an ally, and I would say, because this is sort of loosely themed about women and women finding their voice, for any men, it doesn't have to be just men, for any men here watching this or anyone else, what are some best practices to start with authentic allyship? And anyone can feel free to jump in here.
Stop acting like the person you want to help have to come up a level before you are willing to help them. I have heard many people tell me, I'm going to give you the introduction once you do ABC, right? Bump that. I don't need to do ABC. Just go ahead and make that introduction. Stop being a gatekeeper and let people in. Right? Stop it. So that's one thing they can do with a smile. Always do it with a smile. But that's my one caveat.
I love that.
I'll tag on to Ruby. I talk about, this is based on Dr. Tracy Brower's work. She identified 5 types of courage in an article for Forbes, and I was really inspired by it. And so my very quickly 5 types of being an ally, or 5 types of courage when it comes to speaking up, and I'm reading them off my book. Speak with authenticity. Speak up when you see someone wronged. Speak for yourself. Listen, and still speaking, which has to do with skilling up on resilience. So that's how I end the book, and also my 5 ways of speaking courageously.
Absolutely. In my world, we talk about parenting out loud. So as many male caregivers as possible who can talk about the fact that they need to go to their kid's softball game and leave a tiny bit early, who are taking their own kids to see me as a pediatrician, so that way we're not perpetuating this cycle of women carrying the mental load over and over and over again, that it's visible in the workplace and at home. And the other big thing in terms of home equity is really fully taking the mental load when you take it. So practicing for our male allies, not asking a bunch of questions about the task at hand, instead just taking it on. And for women, and this is difficult, but it's so important to take a giant step back and say, hey, if it's not done to my specifications, that's okay. I would rather have the other person practice and get very skilled at doing this in their own way than have me have to have control and to do it continuously.
Yes.
I mean, my God, yes. I'm going to add something that's a little bit technical. Let me give you a technical term, but once you see it everywhere. So in my book, for the Reflect Reality chapter, I talk about linguistic distortions that are common both in and out of the workplace. And the one that is really, really relevant to women and people perceived as female, you don't have to, doesn't matter what your gender identity is, you just have to be perceived as female is enough, is what I call inflating language. Inflating language describes somebody's reasonable words or behavior as if they are unacceptable or problematic. And this is applied to women's communication at work all the time. So women are the only people called abrasive in performance reviews, or called bossy, or called aggressive, when male counterparts or people perceived as male are described as passionate, straightforward, etc. When women point out bias, they're told that they're oversensitive, emotional, playing the gender card, etc. When they're calling out something that's very real. So as a male ally, if you start looking for these times that, well, if I said it, that wouldn't be a problem, that's the time for you to step in and undo that linguistic distortion and say, you're describing this behavior as problematic and you're using this thing called inflating language, or dump the term, whatever. But you're describing this as problematic, but it's not problematic. If in a meeting I said, hey, we should take the schedule into consideration, you wouldn't pull me aside and say, oh, you're so difficult with so many unseemly outbursts, right? This is real data. So this is the place that men can step in. And again, people perceived as male can step in and really make a difference and call it out and say, ooh, there's a double standard, and that double standard is really hurting our female colleagues or women in the family, wherever it is. It happens everywhere. So anywhere you are, you can do this ally work and shut that ish down.
Yes.
Yes. That's all I'm going to say about that, Suzanne, Dr. Suzanne. Yes. But one last thing I forgot. We can all close the racial wealth gap. There is one thing we can all do, because it will benefit all of us. Once one ship.
The connection hanging on so long here.
Now we don't know what it is.
The last moment. Maybe I'll just give one more second. I know we only have. Maybe I'll continue on, and if Ruby's connection comes back, I'll let her jump back in. But before we wrap up, because we only have 2 minutes left, I just want to say that all of these items, we have a term at Consciously Unbiased called microprogressions. And so everything that's being set up into this point, whether it be aimed at an ally or aimed at ourselves or aimed at someone we might know, it's the opposite of microaggression. It's a microprogression, which is these small action steps that can lead to a big change over time. So everything that's been said so far has been a microprogression. So thank you for sharing that with our audience. And because we only have 1 minute left together, I wanted to save space here at the end to just go ahead and give a shout out towards yourself. If someone's listening right now, where can they find you? If you want to maybe direct people towards a website, a link to buy a book, just right now, any airtime for being able to direct folks towards you, where can they find you?
I'll jump in and say, if you can spell my first and last name, it's SuzanneWertheim.com, and then you can find anything there. And I have a monthly newsletter where I give away inclusive language tips and tricks.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Mine is the same. It is my name, all one word, JessicaDoyleMeckes.com. And there is a link to the book right on the website. And I would say also, again, it comes out on the 15th. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and then if I'm offering exclusively signed copies through an independent bookstore in Wake Forest near me, and that is called Page 158 Books as well.
Wow, yay! Head out, everyone, if you happen to be in the area.
Awesome.
Great.
And I'm at modernmommydoc.com. So DOC like doctor. And when you pre-order my book, it comes out January 23rd. You will also get free access to my app, which has, I put on my pediatrician hat, has navigating emotions, gets into parenting with a partner, but also does deep dives into each of the chapters in the book, where you can in real time do the practices and get really good at putting yourself back in the center of your own life.
Thank you. Great.
And you can check us out at the unconventional CEO.com. Sign up for our weekly newsletter and check us out at financialjoyschool.com.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. I hope that everyone who's tuned in today enjoyed as well and can head back to their day and have lots to think about. So thank you so much, everyone. And have a great rest of your day.
Peace.